Tom Jennings is a happy guy, loves people, full of life.
I've known Tom 55 years. I have never heard a word of criticism out of his mouth for anyone.
My dad was maybe not always perfect, but he was committed and engaged every day in my life.
The guy just never gives up. He never quits. He just keeps forging ahead. He tries to do the right thing all the time.
How did Tom make the transition from a childhood being abused to becoming a truly loving person? When you think about that journey, it's got to be spiritual.
I knew in the worst of times, he was on my side. And it's because I knew in its core that that's who he was as a man.
Chicago in the 1930s, while the Great Depression blanketed the city, the sound of blues and jazz filled the air, and the streets were ruled by gangsters like Al Capone. But in 1936, on the campus of DePaul University, one of those gangsters played the unlikely role of Cupid.
Angelo Vasco was a student at DePaul University. He was the number 2 man at Tony Accardo in the Chicago Mob. And his girlfriend was Rosemary. And Rosemary and my mother were sorority sisters. And my parents ended up in an elevator with Angelo and Rosemary. And they introduced my mother and father to each other.
4 years later, from the elevator to the altar, Thomas Patrick Jennings, known as Pat, and Helen Bernice Johnson were married. And 16 months later, on October 14th of 1942, they welcomed into the world Thomas George Jennings.
When I was born, shortly after, my dad got drafted in the Navy, and he ended up in the South Pacific. I did not see my father until 1946.
With his father commissioned in the Navy, Tom's early years were shaped by his mother and grandparents, all sharing a 2-story bungalow on Chicago's South Side.
My male presence was my grandfather, who was a wonderful, wonderful man. I have vague memories of, showing me tools and showing me things. He taught me to use my hands, and I think that's a lesson that I still have today.
But in 1946, Pat Jennings returned home from World War II, and for the first time at the age of 4, Tom would finally meet his father. It would be the start of a turbulent relationship that would last a lifetime.
Well, there was an intruder in my life because, it was just my mother and I, and all of a sudden there's a man in the house. And he was a pretty rigid guy. All of a sudden I'm making my bed every day and I'm lining my shoes up underneath the bed. I realized later it was full military style.
Emotionally, it was the strict routine, the discipline that was way inappropriate for a child. And then also the neglect. I
had to be on the honor roll. I had to do this, I had to do that. And there was no slipping up. If I got a B, I got my butt kicked. It was rigid and uncomfortable, but as a young boy, I really didn't know how to handle it. I never was comfortable with my father.
Struggling to find an emotional bond with his own parents, Tom found a loving caregiver in a woman just 16 years his senior, his Aunt Veronica, affectionately known as Ronnie.
My Aunt Ronnie was my dad's sister. She was 16 years younger than my father and 16 years older than me.
Aunt Ronnie was super important to my dad. I knew that even as a child. She was more like a big sister to him.
She had his back. She loved him. She went out of her way to take care of him. If he needed something, she was there.
My mother was always going to side with my father, no matter what it was, right or wrong or indifferent. But my aunt would listen to me and say, Ronnie was so special about, because she was a teacher for so long, she listened and she would give me a counter opinion. Or she'd say, yeah, that's right, now think that through. And I never got that at home. It was black or white at home.
While attending grade school at St. Killian's, Jennings suffered an ankle injury that would keep him out of school sports. But as he grew, he soon became a fixture on Chicago's famous sandlots.
We had a park 2 blocks from us. So I'd do my homework real quick, get on my bike, and go to the park, because it was away from the house. Thillins was the armored car company in Chicago, and one of the Thillinses and I became friends, and I became the only Gentile on their baseball team. It was kind of a unique experience. I was never a great athlete. I was a good athlete. I was picked on every team, but I was never the star of the team.
After 4 years at ultra-strict St. George High School, Tom Jennings was ready for a change.
I'll never forget, he told me the day he finished high school, he burned his tie.
In 1960, the vibe of the nation was changing. John Kennedy, an Irish Catholic, was elected president. Chubby Checker was doing the twist, and fresh out of high school, Tom desperately wanted to leave Chicago and go away to college. But the ever-growing divide between Tom and his parents was about to get even wider.
My mother got in a very bad car accident, and so it was decided that I couldn't go away to school. I had to stay home and take care of my mother. So real quick, I applied to Loyola University School of Business downtown. They were going to lose control over me if I went away. My buddies all left. That was probably another thing that was a real burr in my side, because the fellas that I hung around with the most in high school were gone.
After only 1 semester at Loyola, Tom Jennings had had enough. In April 1961, he dropped out of school, but with all immediate roads leading to the military draft, he decided to beat Uncle Sam to the punch, and he enlisted in the U.S. Army.
The reason I chose the Army was my uncle and my father both were in the Navy, and I said, I can't go to the Navy.
He was just like, I got to do my own thing. I need to create some space for myself. I came to the fork in the road, and I went the other way.
The decision to enlist had a devastating effect on his mother, Helen.
Well, when I finally told my parents that I had signed up and enlisted in the Army, my mother went off the charts. She was going to get me canceled. She said, it can't be. She went crazy, and I don't know who she was going to call, and the general of the Army or something, say, you can't go.
After a stay at Fort Bliss in Texas, Jennings was stationed on a nuclear missile base in Rhode Island, and he quickly found himself in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
I call upon Chairman Khrushchev to halt and eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace.
I was stationed at a nuclear missile base in Bristol, Rhode Island. And we had these high-power Hercules missiles, and we had a high-power radar, and we were protecting the city of New York. Down in the day room watching television, all of a sudden the sirens go off in a day that we didn't expect them to be going off. So you run like hell up the hill, and all of a sudden the lights are going from dark to all the way to red, like right now. And red meant we're ready to fire. And we were like that at that level for 5.5 days. That probably was the most nerve-wracking physically and emotionally that I've ever been involved with. And to this day, that's true. It was defining to me in that this could be life or death. And not only for us, but a whole lot of people. Because if those missiles got through to New York City, a lot of people are going to die.
After enduring the Cuban Missile Crisis, Jennings and his fellow Army mates were still in Rhode Island on that fateful day of November 22nd, 1963.
The siren went off again. The siren was controlled by NORAD. We didn't control the siren. I caught a glimpse of the news when I was running out of the day room to go up. Now, this time, I'm the second guy with the keys. It was really eerie because everybody, myself included, didn't know what to say or how to say it. But you could see everybody was tense.
The missiles stayed locked, loaded, and ready for 3 unnerving days. By the spring of 1964, Jennings was out of the Army and back in Chicago, the proud owner of a '64 Chevy Impala. He worked at Kroger's and played sports in the city's famed beer leagues. He would join the Electricians Union and get his apprenticeship. And in the fall of 1966, he made a social decision that would change the course of his life.
My parents were in Florida, and they said, stay at the house. Okay, I'll stay at the house as long as you're not there. So anyway, I thought we have this group over, have a party. And then I called my cousin at Mundelein College, and I say, hey, why don't you and some girls come over? I'm having this party.
She didn't go. And how I got there, I have no idea. It wasn't long before I found myself in the laundry room of this beautiful ranch-style house. Tom was saying to me,
I told her I was going to marry her.
And I thought, okay, what?
There was an aura about her that was more like my aunt than my parents. It was something I strived for and didn't have.
But it is safe to say that initial feeling wasn't exactly mutual.
I always recall the dress slacks he had on were really baggy, and he had on this kind of oversized dress shirt. He just looked kind of sloppy and dorky.
My mom's not really one to talk because she had been a nun prior to that. She was a nun for 5 years, so I think it's really crazy that she would say that my dad was dorky when she had been living in a habit.
I mean, he's the guy that threw the party and got the girl. I mean, really, like, this guy was a baller.
He really swept me off my feet in just the old-fashioned way of saying that. He did. He swept me off my feet.
A love affair and courtship had begun, one that included a night out on Chicago's famed haven of depravity, the one and only Rush Street.
I spent a few years as a BVM nun, and so when I decided to leave that lifestyle and then eventually met Tom, when Tom asked me to go out on that first date, it was to go to Rush Street. So I was thrilled. I thought, oh, this is great. And plus, I grew up in Iowa, and I had no excitement in my life.
And down about midnight, I said, she don't belong here. Maybe I don't either. That was a revelation to me. And I never took her back.
That was it. I never saw Rush Street again.
On August 19, 1967, Tom Jennings and Jackie Lewis were married in Clinton, Iowa.
We got married at St. Mary's, and then we had this big reception. It was a great time.
All of those people from Chicago and all around the country that were relatives of Tom and Tom's parents, they all went to Clinton for the wedding. And that was just, I was so impressed with that.
We just invaded this Clinton, Iowa. The biggest motel in town was a place called the Frontier, and I think we had every room in the place.
It was really a beautiful day. It's the beginning of a beautiful journey.
She was as beautiful as ever and gracious, very gracious.
I was so happy. This is what I wanted to do. Get married to a wonderful man and have children. That was my dream.
As a young couple, Tom and Jackie worked hard during the week, and they played even harder on the weekends. And when they played, it was usually on the water. Members of the Chicagoland Water Ski Association, where they thrilled the masses with their ski shows. Jackie skied and Tom drove the boat.
They would go on the weekends and go ski, so they had activities that they did. And I think the most thing it did in terms of shaping my view of my parents was that they had a life before kids. And I remember thinking that in real time as a child.
We got the ski boat, and we did these shows. Jackie was in the pyramids, and I was taught to be the driver, which I found out was a lot harder than being the skier because, I was a pretty good skier, but, towing 8 people was tricky.
The water ski club was really fun. Some of the members were a little wild.
It was great because we had people like-minded that were enjoying the water, enjoying each other. It was just a very relaxing, enjoyable time. Up until that time, it probably was except for Mary and Jackie, it was probably the second happiest time.
By the time the 1970s rolled around, the Jennings family was about to grow. And on April 27th of 1970, Julie Jennings was born in Park Ridge, Illinois.
I think Tom consciously might not have even realized what it meant to him.
I said I want to do things for her that weren't done for me. I never wanted to leave our children behind when we went someplace.
He was so thrilled to be a father. He loved Julie so much.
But as Tom's family life was changing, so too was his professional life.
My father was very active in union politics in the city of Chicago. So he decided, not consulting me in any way, that I was going to be a business agent for the union that I belonged to. He said, you're going to work 6 more months and you're going to do this. And I said, oh, no, I'm not. No, I'm not.
Stuck in the middle of another relentless Chicago winter and feeling the pressure from an unyielding father, in December 1971, Tom headed west to find work. And when his first stop in Las Vegas proved fruitless, he made what would turn out to be a critical decision.
It dawned on me that I knew somebody in Phoenix. So I said, well, I'm not going to stay up here in Vegas. I don't know anybody. So I drove down to Phoenix and I talked to this couple. They said, well, why don't you go down to the hall here? There's a lot of work around here. So I went down to the hall on Monday and I went to work on Tuesday.
For 6 weeks, Tom lived in his car and sent the money he saved back home to Jackie and Julie in Chicago. But soon the electrician would have to become a salesman.
It took a lot of convincing to get Jackie to come down. She thought, she never verbalized it, but I think she still saw cowboys and Indians and wagon trains or something. I don't know.
I felt myself to be a little bit sophisticated. And when Tom mentioned Phoenix, Arizona, all I could think of was the Wild West. I had no idea.
But in March of 1972, Jackie boarded a plane, leaving the Windy City for Phoenix, Arizona.
Which was the ideal time to come here to Arizona, to the desert. So we had the orange blossoms and fragrance in the air. We had the warm air coming from the rain and sleet and snow of Chicago. It was a great sales job.
And she stepped off the plane at Sky Harbor Airport in the orange blossoms. And she smelled those and she said, wow.
It was just perfect. It was paradise.
A year after settling in the Southwest, Tom and Jackie welcomed their second child, Mark, in 1973. And in October of '76, along came Brian. The Jennings clan was now complete, but whether by horse, boat, stagecoach, land, or sea, the memories were only just beginning.
We had the boat, and I bought a camper, and we always went camping. And then I went from that to a motorhome.
Our vacations consisted of boating. And, so my mom and dad taught us how to ski. He taught me how to drive a boat. My dad was the driver when he was younger, and when I was about 14, I became the driver of the boat.
He worked hard to be the father he wanted to be. He had an ideal in mind and he achieved it.
My dad took a detour all the way to South Dakota so he could take me to the homestead of Laura Ingalls and go to the museum and see their their gravesite, the gravesite of the Ingalls family from Little House on the Prairie, because I was a huge fan of Little House on the Prairie, and that meant the world to me.
While Mark and Julie recall stories from vacations past, youngest son Brian remembers an unmistakable bond with his father, much closer to home.
My dad and I, we were buddies and partners in crime. So we were mowing the lawn on the weekend. For me, my childhood was watching Notre Dame games on Saturdays in the garage on our black and white TV. On Sunday, if we had more to do, this TV would be on the 49ers games, black and white. You could hear it like echoing in the garage as we're mowing the lawn.
Throughout the mid-'70s, Tom worked as an electrician in Phoenix and at times around the country. But a traumatic event in 1977 once again helped to change the course of his life.
The work got slow in Phoenix, so I found I'd get another job with a lot of overtime in Racine, Kansas, at a powerhouse. Early one morning, we were doing some work, and I fell, and A 4-inch length of rigid pipe fell across my chest when I hit the ground. And I herniated 2 discs and fractured 2 vertebrae. And I didn't work for almost a year.
Unable to handle the physical nature of the job, in 1977, Tom landed a sales position at Westinghouse Electrical Supply. And shortly after that came the date that would alter the life of Tom Jennings forever.
September 14th, 1978.
A self-professed daily drinker since the age of 13, on September 14th of 1978, Tom Jennings attended his first ever meeting at Alcoholics Anonymous.
My quality of relationship with my wife and children was pretty damn poor. My relationship with myself was pretty poor.
There were a few years leading up to that date when I knew something was wrong. Our marriage was not good, but I didn't know what it was.
What it was alcoholism. And from that day forward, September 14, 1978, Tom Jennings remained committed and steadfast in his sobriety.
Made me a much more conscientious and aware person. I was not the self-centered person that I was before that.
I think the moment my dad decided to stop drinking was a pivotal moment for our family. And growing up on the recovery side of alcohol is a totally different experience, as I understand it, than the abuse side of alcohol. And that really gave us a chance to have the lives that we have.
It changed him completely. Our lives would have been different completely.
A simple example I can show you, my kids were going to St. Thomas's at that time. They didn't have any air conditioning. If it was real hot, they used to get out at noon and I have to leave my office and come pick them up. Quite honestly, I was kind of resentful I had to do that. I mean, that was my thinking. After I got sober, I started realizing what a horse's ass I was. And I just enjoyed doing what I was supposed to have been doing in the first place.
And 8 years later, the mettle of the man never more evident than through the eyes of then 12-year-old Mark.
We were coming home from a Fiesta Bowl parade, and my grandparents, my dad's mom and dad, were taking us home, and my grandma and grandpa were probably drinking, and for some reason, they decided to lay into me and my brother. We're entitled, we're not grateful, I don't know. My parents told me it took me like 3 days of like nightmares to get over it. Well, they called my parents over, and Aunt Ronnie was here that time too. And they came to the house and it was a big conflict. And my dad and mom were like, no, you're not doing to my kids what you did to me. And it was probably one of the most hurtful days of my life. But what I found out about my dad was that we were more important. And he wasn't going to allow that. I knew in the worst of times, he was on my side. And it's because I knew in its core that that's who he was as a man.
After serving as a sales manager at Tri-Electric in the mid-'80s, Jennings caught on as a lighting rep with GE Products. During that time, thanks to dear friend Alex Crutchfield, Tom became involved with the Fiesta Bowl, a proud wearer of that prestigious yellow jacket, an influential bowl booster, and a life member.
I never would have used the word at the time, but in hindsight, proud of my dad. Like, he was like a boss, right? Like, he's involved, he's making stuff happen, right? When I'd go to, say, the $1 Million Hole-in-One, which still happens today, he was one of the co-founders of that event.
The big event for me was going to the Fiesta Bowl game every year. Being in Sun Devil Stadium was like every year it's like a Super Bowl stadium pack, 75,000 people. The bands going from different schools from around the country, 2 teams having it out.
The biggest thing that we probably enjoyed more than any other one event, at least in that period, was the after parade party at the Biltmore with the strolling violins and Chuck Yeager, and it was the Grand Marshal, and the kids all got to meet Chuck Yeager.
For me, it was very exciting to meet the celebrities, like Barbara Eden. I mean, I met Jeannie from I Dream of Jeannie.
That was my introduction to kind of like the upper echelon part of the world, right? And I truly think, because there'd be like some quasi-celebrities at these things, and you know, I was thinking about this recently about, I really think those events opened my mind to that, you know, I was welcome in that world. You can be successful, you can get involved with like excellence.
From bowl games to road trips, the Jennings family rolled through the 80s, sometimes with a little levity about the pathway to the perfect destination.
This is a good looking piece of road.
What a beautiful piece of road it is.
The ongoing joke. So,
In the early 90s, my mom and dad and Brian and I went to Seattle.
and at some point we were driving past where the Boeing facility is.
They just opened the causeway from Bellevue to Seattle.
And there's like the beautiful like green trees and the clouds rolling in. And my dad says, this is one good looking piece of road.
And I started to say that. And in unison, they said the same thing again.
And Brian and I lost it.
It just caught our ear, right? Like as kids.
So it became kind of a one of the things you say when you're driving in the motorhome or the camper.
I have my kids make fun of me now, and you say things that just live in infamy, but that's his.
As Tom moved closer to retirement, his children were carving out their own niches. Julie would join the Peace Corps and later work for the FBI.
Julie is a very special young lady, always has been. She's the one that remembers my drinking, and she was the one hiding in the bedroom, you know, all that. So it took a lot of healing to create a relationship with her, and I worked very hard at it.
I didn't exactly take a straightforward path. I've always worked in the human services field, and he never criticized me. He was always very supportive of that.
And I've always just had a great warmth for Julie. Just maybe because I know I damaged the flower, and I just, you know, wanted always to stay connected.
Brian played football at Arizona State and then went on to a 13-year career in the NFL with the San Francisco 49ers.
There's a couple of things to know about my football career and my dad. One of them is it never happens without my dad. There is no football for me without my dad, and specifically through his work with the Fiesta Bowl and you know, charities around the valley. He introduced me when I was in high school to Frank Cush, and Frank Cush reintroduced me to the staff at Arizona State, and that's how I walked on at Arizona State. The other thing to know is that on every team I ever played on, all my teammates' parents and all my teammates would always talk about how awesome my dad is. So he's always, you know, before, during, and after games, you know, meeting people, talking to them, you know, just loving them, you know, finding out more about them. And so he's definitely, you know, part of the fabric of not only my journey, but we're talking about hundreds of teammates' journeys.
I was just so grateful that I was there to see it, and so grateful that he got to achieve what he worked so hard for. I mean, to see how hard he worked to do what he did just blew my mind.
Tom's last career stop as owner of Servo Electronic became a family enterprise when Mark expanded on what his father built, opening MTJ Electric in 2002.
He had a plan. Mark always has a plan.
Growing up, my dad and I butted heads a lot. You know, we're just both that like stubborn Irish person, and so then we went to work for each other. Guess what? We butted heads at work too.
I'm very proud. You know, the business is doing far better than when I ever ran it.
I still do business with some people that were my dad's clients. I just built almost $1 million school with a client that was my dad's, and so it shapes my family life today. And how I raise my kids and support my family is with a business that I got into and was trained and taught by my father.
Retiring at the age of 62, Tom's focus remained on his family, but also his health, which since the age of 47 has been the source of, at times, great concern.
At 47, I had to have a stent put in my heart. At 48, the stent failed. I had to have open heart surgery. They took my heart out of it, put it in a vessel. They repaired me. I had a replacement of a hip and a knee.
He's incredible. He's absolutely incredible. And Tom never gives up.
He just kept showing up. I mean, the guy just never gives up. He never quits. He just keeps forging ahead.
I remember after my open heart surgery, I said to one of the counselors there, I said, you know, my kids are too young. I can't leave them like this. They said, good, now you're motivated. Here's what you got to do.
Time after time, Tom did whatever it took to regain control of his health. And now, with 7 grandchildren, he forges on, forever the patriarch and symbol of family, fortitude, love, and perseverance.
I can't tell somebody what it's like. I can only show them that you can go through it. I can only show them that you can live a sober life and have fun and enjoy it. I can only show them that you can overcome injuries, bumpy roads in your marriage, bumpy roads in professional life. Come out the other side.
When I think about my dad in childhood, is that my dad was maybe not always perfect, just like I'm not perfect as a dad with my kids, but he was committed and engaged every day of my life.
To look at his life is to be so grateful and to realize what a fantastic journey this has been for him. How did he do it? Where did that strength come from? It was always there. He just had to dig for it and let it blossom.
If I imagine my dad's childhood in the 40s and 50s and my kids' childhood, there's such a gap in love and connection and time together that I really point at my dad as, you know, the change maker. He shifted, absolutely shifted our family.
My dad took pride in his sobriety and his journey and how he's been able to help other people.
I know that he loves me. He loves my mom and my siblings and my children and his other grandchildren, and he made that apparent every day of his life through his commitment and the way he lives.
And the way he lives is the way that Thomas George Jennings wants to forever be remembered.
As a caring person, a giving person, a loving person. That's about it.